There are still some tickets available for my live event in February. Check the show notes for the ticket link. Hello and welcome to episode 113 of Authors Afterword, formerly known as the Wormhole Podcast. On this podcast, I talk to an author about one, occasionally more, of their books in detail. So, I'm Charlie Place, and today I am joined by Chloe C Peñaranda to discuss her first traditionally published book, The Stars Are Dying. Astrea only remembers the last 5 years of her life, and those 5 years have been spent under the isolating protection of Hector, who spends some nights in her bed, but also many nights in others' beds. Top-notch fellow, this guy, absolutely top-notch. On an evening when she's on one of her stealth escapes, she likes watching the gatherings she can't join, Astrea meets a mysterious man called Nyte. He later helps her escape the building for good. She will end up in the Libertatum trials held by the Crown, which, if won, make the victor's homeland safe from the vampires for 100 years. And she will need to relearn what she's forgotten about who she is, why she has tattoos of the waxing moon on her body, and why Nyte is both a voice in her head and able to be by her side in an instant. It's a pretty literal star-crossed lovers, this one. Hello, Chloe.
Hello.
It is lovely to have you.
It's lovely to be on here. Thank you.
You've said in the past, I believe, about how you read fantasy and wrote it when you were younger, but then you'd got into books like ACOTAR, I should probably say A Court of Thorn and Roses, for anyone who happens to not know what that is, this sort of newer romance fantasy. Did the development of this romantasy genre help you focus your own skills? Was it the genre you had been waiting for, as such?
In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. So I obviously started publishing with An Heir Comes to Rise, my longer series, which is definitely more fantasy forward than romantasy. So I always loved epic scale fantasies, multiple books, multiple plot lines interweaving and things. So romantasy developed and it became something not new, but definitely newer to focus on just one couple, which is very much what The Stars Are Dying is about. The Nightfall trilogy is focusing on the romantasy aspect and the couple and their star-crossed lovers. But before, the first things that I ever published were more epic fantasy. The found family is like my favourite trope. So it's been a shift, but I love both genres, basically.
Fair enough. Well, we will get on to The Stars Are Dying. Can you tell us what the initial idea or the first kernel thought that you had was for this series?
I wouldn't have the Nightfall trilogy. It wouldn't be what it is without An Heir Comes to Rise. I had this idea of, when I started looking into the constellations and things, because I knew I wanted this starlight atmosphere, and I started researching into the constellations, and I came across the Greek myth of Astrea, who was the constellation Virgo, and the idea of the collapse of this golden age of mankind. And I had an idea with a character who's not quite on page in my other series, but I had the idea of what happens if the golden age of Astrea's world didn't collapse because of mankind, but from a star-crossed love story between a villainous character who was never supposed to be in her realm, and having these two characters that are as powerful as each other, clashing forces and collapsing the solar magic, basically.
Okay, well, I got the Greek mythology, and obviously there's the constellation there, but there's obviously a lot more that goes into it than I've even noticed. Can you talk more about this? Expand on your thoughts and your planning and stuff like that?
Planning, I don't have a whole lot of planning going on. A lot of it is just discovery. So it started with the idea of the atmosphere, like the stars in the night. I read into constellations and Astrea, and from there it was just the discovery. So I knew that I wanted more species in this world, whereas like An Heir Comes to Rise is just humans and fae, and The Stars Are Dying in the Nightfall trilogy, I wanted to have more species. So then I started thinking of, what if we had fae and then vampires, who are the terrorizers of the society known as so far. And then when I had the vampires, I started thinking, well, you have one type of vampire everybody knows, which is the blood drinking kind, and I wanted to expand on that as well. So I ended up with vampires that drink blood, that consume souls, that can walk in the daylight, that can't walk in the daylight. Some have wings, some don't. So there's a lot of lore there. And while the Nightfall trilogy is going to be focused on Nyte and Astraea's story, the world just is so large that there's potential for just more exploration. The Fae in this world as well have different quirks. So I was just, as I wrote, just more things develop in this world that has made it quite big.
Okay, so am I reading something into this? Maybe there's going to be a spin-off series or something at some point?
I mean, I think there's definitely open doors. There's mentions of the Guardians, which raised Astrea at one point, and you touch upon more of those in books 2 and 3. So, I have ideas floating around, because Astrea was raised by these 6 Guardians who were one of every species in the world, every vampire. So I think it'd be really interesting to potentially do spin-offs with those dynamics. In the age before Astrea, the species were all at war and have these differences towards each other, how they all came together, and then these 6 were chosen to raise Astrea. So there's just a lot of lore that we probably won't get a lot of in the core Nightfall trilogy that I think would be really fun to explore and give readers just extra kernels of that world and how Astrea could be as well.
Well, I love that you've got it here as well. So this is nice so people can hear it here. And this actually goes into a question that I had noted. I was wondering, and I think you kind of answered some of the question, but maybe there's more to be said, why it was exactly that you chose this period, essentially, of Astrea's life as opposed to the first iteration of her and Nyte's relationship to focus on.
I really like the idea of doing this kind of past versus present race against time. Fate won last time. Can we defeat Fate again? And in the Greek myth of Astrea, it's prophesied that she was to return to Earth and bring about the Golden Age again. So I wanted to start this story with her prophesied return. And I didn't want it to be a return of instant action. She knows exactly who did what and just comes in and tries to make things right. I wanted to really build on her vulnerable side and make her learn who she is, learn about the world. It opens up a lot of growth. And then the next 2 books is Astrea and Nyte just fighting to keep their love while also we want to save the world, but they're stubborn in love. So I think that's why, it was both a mix of wanting to have that development with Astrea as a character and the Greek myth of Astrea just starting with her prophesied return. And book 2, we get glimpses of the past, so we get to see how they met and how they discovered what was wrong with the world, and while also reflecting on their current situation. So there really is this race against time, past versus present, which was really fun for me to explore with.
Really interesting to find out about all this and also the future and everything else. You'd say about not planning or whatever. Did you have any idea where you want the story to kind of head before you started? The general direction or more specifics, stuff like that?
Pretty much. I think I always have core pieces, the beginning and end of every book. And along the way, things kind of change. Like in book 3, things happen that I didn't quite anticipate, which I think are quite cool. And so things do transpire as I'm writing, but I know kind of like the beginning and end of each book at least, and probably about the midpoint on what's going to stir things up for them. And then the rest is just walking through the book with the characters and seeing what unfolds. I discovered a lot more intriguing things, so it's really fun.
Okay, all right. Well, you better tell us, I think if we'll stick to the 2 main characters at the moment. If you can tell us more about them themselves, I suppose, creating Astrea and Nyte.
Yeah, I mean, Astrea and Nyte have one of my favourite dynamics that I think I've written. They are very much opposites attract while being very similar. So I love the idea of having 2 people and 2 forces that are as necessary for each other as they are catastrophic for each other. They're the night and the stars, they're the dark and the light. And where Astrea, especially in her first life, and we get to touch upon more of this later on how she was made out to be this perfect maiden. She had to wear white. She had to be this proper person. And Nyte is the first time where she gets to like explore the dark part of her without it being like a bad thing. She gets to be more of herself. And on the flip side, Nyte is this very sure of himself character who has been used as the villain his whole life, and that's who he is. And with Astrea, it's the first time that he gets to be vulnerable and starts to hear from somebody else's perspective that what happened to him wasn't okay. And he gets to have this real softer side, which he hasn't with anyone else. So I love their dynamic where they balance each other and they're willing to fight for it.
Yes, you definitely got your kind of yin and yang here, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting how you balance Nyte being the hero, because I think he is very much a hero, but he is also an anti-hero. I think definitely towards the end of the book, definitely. The romance is a very, very slow burn. I think you have noted the slow burn in your promotional images and stuff. Why did you choose this method of inclusion, the slow burn, as opposed to something else?
I think slow burn is always going to be slow burn with me. I love the progression, especially with Nyte knowing knowing everything that Astrea doesn't know. He doesn't want to compose himself, and he wants to give her a chance to really reject him, essentially, try not to repeat the past. It was bound to happen, but I always do a slow burn. I mean, my Heir Comes to Rise series is a slow burn. Like, the main characters don't even kiss until the second half of the third book, so this is not too slow for me in a sense, where I've come from a longer series. But definitely, I think it was just, especially with their circumstances, Nyte was never going to come full on to her, even though he knows how much he loves her and has been in love with her. He's also very considerate of how vulnerable she is and open to manipulation that she has suffered and things like that. So I think they progressed quite well on Astrea's terms in this book.
So a fast burn in terms of Chloe's work. And I will have links to the other books that Chloe is talking about, her back catalogue, in the episode show notes for you listeners. Ever worry that Nyte's powers might make things too easy? How did you get around that?
Yeah, it's always difficult dealing with really powerful characters. And there's definitely things that you need to implement in the world that are going to nullify powers or restrict them or things like that. So Nyte is trapped the whole time and he can't do anything really. So when he gets out and we discover the height of his powers, then yeah, it can seem like there's going to be a challenge to put him in a box and not make him be able to do everything. And I think it works out fairly well. There are definitely just different weapons and things that he's not invincible, and no character is ever invincible. And that is kind of what I like to emphasize just through various different things. He is very powerful, but against an army, he's not going to be. Against certain weapons, he's not going to be. So it's just getting those elements of the story in at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, you saying what you have, he's definitely physically limited, at least for most of the book. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So you have touched on it very briefly, but without the words so much. But I would like to get on to Astrea's mental state. So I suppose I want to ask, to start with, how did you work with giving readers answers in regards to her mental state? When to give answers, when to hold back? How did you come to decisions on this?
I think Astrea is just very much a character that you need to walk through the world with. She's quite an unreliable narrator. She's got a very limited point of view of the world. So I think she's a character that you've got to put yourself more in her shoes than quite a lot of other characters. And emotionally, she just has these breaking points with our best friend dying and Hector before that. There's various moments of vulnerability where she kind of breaks a little bit. And I think Astrea was a character that was very cathartic for me to write. I think she came to me at a time that I really bonded with her more than quite a few characters. And she does have a lot of representation of different mental states. Like, I think she does represent the self-doubt and depression at sometimes, and building through that is her own journey, and the people she meets along the way, I think, really help her to see things about herself that she has not allowed herself to see, and has also not been allowed to see, coming from the situation with Hector.
Okay. Oh, thank you for your expansion. Talking of Astrea herself then, in terms of the amnesia and the abuse, are you able to tell us about this, about the importance of including them, I suppose?
Yeah, I think Astrea's beginning situation is tough, and it is really important, and I think that's what makes it tough. And I've known people that have been through the same thing that Astrea's been through, and I knew that she was coming back without her memories was part of the lore thing. And I think a lot of women can see themselves in the situation where Astrea thinks she loves Hector and it's all she knows. And Hector's very manipulative. He's a narcissist and she's just led to believe. And it's like she can leave, but she doesn't believe in herself enough to leave. And I think going through that journey of Astrea, just finally breaking her own chains, essentially, when she gets the opportunity, I think a lot of people can relate to or understand with, even if it's not a direct relationship with her. I think the emotions she goes through can apply to a lot of different scenarios in our lives. So that was my reason for starting her where she was.
This is, I suppose, links back into what you said earlier about having found family in your books as well. This comes into it, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love the found family aspect of books. It's my favourite.
I like it as well. It's a very nice thing. The Libertatum, am I pronouncing that right? Would you say Libertatum, Libertatum?
Yeah, I'm still Libertatum.
Okay. Tell us about this, about creating it.
The games were, I didn't want to have sort of like these gladiator style games. To Astrea's character, she's a very much a puzzle-minded person. So as we get towards the spoiler part of the book, we discover that she created the games long ago with her key. When she died, she broke the key and the key became parts of this game, and the king was the first one to play them and couldn't find the actual key that he needed, well, the weapon type key, and to get into the temples and things. And so I think Astrea going through them, they weren't too challenging for her. They were more just like these eye-opening moments for her linking to the past. And I think once it comes out that we discover that they were because of Astrea, I think it makes much more sense, and how our mind works with the puzzles. And we get the first glimpse when she's in the end with Cassia, and she's really good at the matchstick puzzle. And then so when she gets into the games, she was worried this whole time that they were going to be these fighting style games when she meets Lilith at the mansion, and she's okay with a bow and things like that. But this is what really panics her about going in, is she's not at that current moment this fighter type person, but when she actually gets in there, she gets to play with her mind, and that is the best tool that she's got. That was kind of it. I just really wanted to foreshadow that Astrea was always going to be good at them, and that when it comes out about the key and the part and that she made the games, I hope just fits that together.
Something that I'm noticing that I want to ask you as you are talking, since we've been talking at the start, is you say about lore, and there is a lot of lore, and you're bringing even more than I had thought of as you're talking. How long did you spend kind of thinking about the world, and before planning as such? How long did this idea develop in your head as a book idea, as a possibility, before you put any pen to paper or anything?
It was just something swirling in the back of my mind ever since I started this, or was in the middle of the 5th book of An Heir Comes to Rise. And it was for 2 reasons. On one hand, I just started feeling like it's time to start working on something else. I'm coming to the end of this long series. What's going to be next? And I started being attracted to something about the night and stars, and then that's how it kind of went. So I don't know, probably like about the best part of a year that was just kind of to and fro. And there's like videos on my TikTok and things of when I first was like, oh, this is how I'm going to plan a new book. And that was long before the book came out. And funnily enough, "The stars are dying" was literally the first sentence that ever came to my mind. I wrote it down in my document. It was never supposed to be the title or anything like that. The book started with "The stars are dying," and it started a completely different way, where Astrea was looking up at the stars, and that was the first thing she noted was "The stars are dying." And then I started talking with friends, and I was like, well, this is going to be Project "The Stars Are Dying." And then it just stuck. So that's how the title actually came about. And yeah, it's just a lot of thinking in the back burner, and then I went full speed ahead.
Yeah, all right, wow. I mean, in the best of ways, yes, I can see why it took you a year. And yeah, all that percolating, that's really interesting. And I'm going to move us on to a different topic now, but it was pretty obvious, and this is, I think, quite late in the book, it was pretty obvious that Astrea stabbing Nyte, as I said, different topic, wasn't going to be the end, but it was still shocking. I would just like to ask if you can tell us about your thoughts here in creating this aspect of the story.
Just the part where she stabs him?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of fun element to it. I think it really is a foreshadow for readers, but a glimpse of the past to them of their enemies to lovers beginning. I mean, they're very much in their past lives I think it's quite obvious at the end of the book, once you start hearing about who Nyte is and who Astrea really is, that they were always these opposing forces and opposing sides. Nyte's known as the villain of the world, Astrea is known as the savior of the world. And so I think that that moment was definitely a callback to their past, how they started. And I think it also was just like a bit of information where we know of what's harmful to Nyte and where to stab them, and just this playful side to them. So I quite like that moment.
I thought it was good, and I thought effectively, is Chloe going to go there? Oh, okay, all right. It's quite a dark addition, but very good. Yeah, I liked it. So you have mentioned An Heir Comes to Rise, and I believe this series is going to cross over somewhere with it. Is that okay to talk about now, or is that too spoilery for the future?
I won't say exactly how, but it did change a lot. It changed a lot for a few reasons. One, it was the publication and the Nightfall trilogy getting picked up versus An Heir Comes to Rise still being indie. And I wanted readers to be able to read one or the other, because not everybody likes both. And I think they do have very different, similar vibes where they're fantasy. I mean, An Heir Comes to Rise does have a lot of romantic subplots, so they do vibe with each other, but at the same time, one person will like one series, one person will like the other series. So I wanted them to be able to be read separately, and so I had to do it in a way that would feed the people that are here for the whole series and be very satisfying, while also making it make sense to have this other character appear in An Heir Comes to Rise, and if you haven't read Nightfall, to not be confused on why they're there. It still is a challenge because I'm still writing the sixth book of An Heir Comes to Rise, but it happens in that book and it's still challenging.
No, I don't doubt it, yeah. Humour me on this one. Did Cassia have to die? Did you consider having her involved further in terms of her physical presence, etc.?
I think Cassia had to die. I think it was very pivotal, one, to project Astrea, and two, I mean, we discovered that Cassia was always going to die and that she fell short of her dreams, but it gave Astrea the opportunity to carry them on for her and go on to do this. And I think, we get Cassia's voice in Astrea's head, because it comes out that she's been harboring her soul the whole time ever since she died. So I think it was like Cassia was almost like a sacrifice where, Astrea got to really propel herself and carry forth that dream while still having Cassia with her. And I think it was a really touching moment when Astrea got to realize that they went through the trials together and release Cassia's soul back to the stars. And I think that if it happened another way where Cassia didn't die and they went, I couldn't see Astrea participating at all in the trials. I think she would have still been in that place of being sheltered. If Cassia would have still been this shelter for her, and I think she had to break out of that, and Cassia as a spirit was happy with that outcome. I think it happened in the best way.
I agree with you, and that's interesting to get your answer there. You have, at least in the ARC I read, but I think you've got it in certain editions of the published edition, you've got a couple of bonus chapters at the end. And one of them is of Rosalind and Zathrian, I think you might say. Zathrian?
I would say Zathrian.
Zathrian, okay. So Rosalind and Zathrian, are they, I mean, they're already important characters, but are they going to become even more important later on?
I think they're just as important to Astrea's journey. I mean, I'm going to reference my other series again, but An Heir Comes to Rise is like, it ends up multiple POVs, and I love that. I love getting so many points of views and different plot lines interweaving. I really had to limit myself with the Nightfall trilogy, because at its core, it is about Nyte and Astraea's story and their star-crossed dilemma. So as much as I got into book 3 and I was like, can I do multiple POVs? I didn't. I kept it to Nyte and Astraea, but I do think that Zath, Rosalind are just as pivotal to Astrea, and the found family grows. Lilith comes back, Davina's still there, so it kind of grows. Drystan he's one of my favorite characters, is a very important character. So yeah, I like I said, the found family, so I like to make everybody quite important. It has been like a different challenge with the Nightfall trilogy with only having 2 POVs. Well, book 1's only Astrea, but book 2 and 3 are Nyte and Astraea's point of views. And yes, the side characters are still important to the story.
You've got loads more spin-off potential there as well anyway.
Yeah.
Tell us about Drystan, his importance to you.
There's a lot more to come out with him so far. So, I mean, the ending is quite touch and go. We don't know what's going to unfold in the next book. So there's a lot of more than meets the eye with Drystan. And I think he's just a really interesting character. And I'm looking forward to seeing how readers respond to him and things. So I don't go too much about Drystan without spoiling things for the next book, I don't think.
Sure, that's okay. Yep. So, book 2, The Night is Defying. Tell us what you can at this point.
What I can say is that we will, like I did touch upon earlier, we do get this past versus present. So we do get glimpses of Nyte and Astraea's past through Nyte's POV. We also get Nyte's POV in the current time. What else can I say? There's a bomb dropped at the end of book 1 about there being this other bondage, so we get to expand upon that and what that means for our star-crossed lovers, Nyte and Astraea, and what it meant back then, what it means now. We do get to see Albania, which is where Astrea's from, so we get to explore more places, and that's all I can kind of share at the moment.
That's absolutely fine. Yeah, you did throw a spanner in the works at the end of that book, definitely.
Yeah. I was in two minds on whether to put that there. And I think it gave a lot of people trust issues and panic about a love triangle type thing. But what I can say is I don't think it's a love triangle. There's definitely complications. I mean, some people don't like to know this and some people do like to know this. So I don't want to speak too much other than it's not going to be an annoying love triangle where she's my heart's torn and things like that.
You said reader responses. I do want to ask, how was the general reader response to your book? If we say in comparison to an Heir to Rise, how have people taken this new project?
I think it's definitely had high highs and low lows. Like a lot of people, and I get it, and this is where like reader feedback and things starts coming in handy, and just seeing how people are receiving a book. And Astrea's story is very different to like Faith's story from An Heir Comes to Rise. I think the Nightfall trilogy is more like this puzzly type book where there is a lot of unanswered questions. The world is very large and coming from somebody that has very limited knowledge. I think The Stars Are Dying can seem very heavy and confusing at times. And I think books 1 and 2 marry in very well with each other. So I'm looking forward to seeing if readers feel that way, where with especially the end of book 1, there was a lot of information thrown at you at the end of book 1, and I get that. And hopefully book 2 really balances the scale on realizing where everything came from. And I think the Nightfall trilogy is one of those books where if you read book 1 and 2 and then read book 1 again or something, you would see everything that was there. But as a first read, it can be difficult to pick up those kind of crumbs sometimes. It's just what I've got from like kind of reader feedback. It's been great as well. So great and interesting.
Yeah. This brings us into asking about the publishing. This is your first time traditionally publishing. How does the experience so far compare to self-publishing, and are you going to continue in both camps?
Yeah, I would love to continue in both. It's really hard to compare to me because I haven't yet traditionally published straight out the gates. So, I mean, The Stars Are Dying, I got to do, once again, everything that I wanted to do with that book, the covers, the interior design, everything that I wanted to do with that book, I got to do, and they pretty much published it the same as what I had and added extra good stuff in it with the sprayed edges and whatnot in the US. And so it would be interesting to me to sell a title straight to traditional and see the cover negotiations, the things like that. But in terms of like, it's really nice to have a team invested in the success of this book, whereas, the independent publishing, you're really your biggest cheerleader. You're wearing a lot of hats. Everything falls on you, the marketing, the everything. So it's been really nice to know there's a lot of people in my corner with this book. It's definitely a perk of traditional publishing, and the publishing houses, Bramble and Wildfire, have been absolutely amazing and really believe in this story and in me. So that's been really lovely. But I love both because I love independent publishing and I love getting to do everything that I want to do. And there's a certain extra special input from me in the independent publishing. So I would always like to maybe do both, but it really just depends on the story, I think.
How did the traditionally publishing come about, if I can ask?
Yeah, it's a bit unconventional, I think. So I was gearing up to release The Stars Are Dying, and I'd done a lot of promo for it. I was really putting myself out there on TikTok, and my videos were getting seen and people were really excited for the story. And my agent reached out to me not long before it was about to come out, and I signed with her. We got on right away, and funnily enough, she reached out to me about An Heir Comes to Rise. She had read that book and loved it and wanted to sell that series, but publishers were more interested in The Stars Are Dying. Of course, it was like about to be a brand new release, a first book in a series, and so there was just a lot more appeal with The Stars Are Dying. And Heir Comes to Rise, there's 5 books out. They're high fantasy, and it's a bigger risk for them. So I would never say never to traditional publishing. I think An Heir Comes to Rise could do well in traditional publishing, especially with like the limitations in print that indie authors have. So having so many books, I think that would be a perk of traditional publishing with that series. But yeah, we sold The Stars Are Dying just before it came out, so they were fine for me to indie publish it. So I went ahead with my indie release, and that was out for a couple of months before I took them all down, and we put up the pre-order for the traditional, and just sort of, it's been a long year. So for me, The Stars Are Dying has been out for over a year, and for the readers who were with me since the indie version, it's been out for that long. So it's been really strange but wonderful that we got to re-release it, and it's like, oh, it's out again. Congratulations. And I'm just really excited for the second book to come out, because I've been waiting for this for over a year now. It would have been out if it was indie published already. Patience has been a virtue in this transition, but it's been, I think, worth it. I'm just really excited for what's to come.
Excited to see just what's happening on your Instagram and following that. No, it's lovely. You say something in your acknowledgements, which I'm going to tentatively assume makes it into the final copy, about house and garden. You had promised your dogs, I believe, that you would get a house and garden, and this traditionally publishing has enabled you to do that. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote those acknowledgements before we sold the book. I mean, I thank my dogs in most of my books, and then Heir Comes to Rise books, and it was just so, I don't know, such a coincidence, a manifestation, whatever we want to call it, that I put in The Stars Are Dying's indie one before we even sold the series, that one day I would get the house for the garden with the dogs. I've always been in apartment life with them, and then we sold that book, which enabled me to get the house. And so that was just a real life moment for me where, yeah, that was the book to do it. So yeah, I still just feel really thankful for that and blessed. So yeah.
It was lovely seeing. I think I read it, and then I saw your TikTok. I was like, hey, she did it. Well done.
I know. I read the acknowledgements again. I was like, oh my goodness, that actually happened. Wow. Yeah, I'm still in awe.
What are you writing now? And I believe it might be is it a love triangle book, or have I got that wrong?
No, it's not a love triangle. I have 2 series which are vying for my attention here. One is more of a romantasy forward at sea type book. Mm-hmm. Not quite pirates and sirens yet, but more like different water abilities, and like this idea of a world that's been drowned by the gods, and there's only these islands left, and so most of like the military and everything is through sea, and the water abilities are the ones who are kind of keeping them safe and things, and secrets to that world. But then on the other hand, I've been thinking about this other idea for over a year now that's been playing, and I have a board that is full of things, and this one is more of like another epic scale fantasy where there's going to be a lot of layers, a lot of magic, a lot of twists and turns that I will take a lot of prep from me, but I think I don't know, I'm really excited about that one. So that one's been something that's been on my mind for a long time, whereas like this romantasy at sea book was more sporadic and more I think would be more fun and things, but the epic scale fantasy is like my bread and butter, and that is what I love is magic systems and friend family and a lot of things. So one of those two I would like to get prepared soon. Maybe pitch to traditional, see if they would be interested first.
Okay, well, obviously I've only spoken to you. This is the first time I'm meeting you, but I really like the second one particularly. It sounds like it will work for you as such.
Yeah, no, I think that will be, a good one to work on. And hopefully all the hard work pays off.
Yes, very much so. Chloe, this has been fantastic having you. I have very much enjoyed your book, and learning about the lore has been really nice because I did not realise just how much you've got in there. Thank you for being here today.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. It was so lovely to get to chat about everything.
I do hope you enjoyed this episode. Do join me next time, and if you have a moment to spare, please do leave a rating and/or review of this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Podcast Addict. Thank you. Authors Afterword, episode 113, was recorded on the 24th of October 2024 and published on the 13th of January 2025. Music and production by Charlie Place.